for tonight. This is Lee Sloan. Can you give it up for Lee as she comes? Lee has been a pastor in multiple churches, and I love the way she speaks, and I've been able to share the stage with her on a number of occasions, and I think you're going to be super blessed as she teaches to us and preaches to us. My wife told me, don't say teach, say preach. That's right. As she preaches from God's Word for us tonight.
Well, I am a teacher, so, and I actually have to give kudos to Rich for asking me, a teacher, to preach on when I haven't preached for a year and a half. I've got a lot in there, so you're brave to ask me to do this. I'm honored to be here, and I really want to just honor Rachel and Rich and the whole team that started. Planting a church is no joke. So I just want to say that you've really developed something here that's really special. Refuge City Church, I feel like, is a refuge. It's literally been a refuge for me as a minister, just to come and experience the presence of God. I call it kind of like God's hot tub. When I come in here, I feel like I'm in a spiritual hot tub. Do you guys, anybody else? Okay. It's just me. So that's okay. Now, does anybody in here, now I know you might be too insecure to raise your hand, but does anybody in here struggle with insecurity or insignificance? Kind of two sides of the same coin. Okay. The rest of you are just too insecure to raise your hand? If not, if you don't ever struggle with it at all, you can probably just go play out there somewhere, because that's what it's going to be about today. And I get to preach out of John 18, which would not be my first pick, right? But you're welcome and for taking your John 18, because this is not my pick. It's actually God's pick. I felt him speaking to me through this, and so we're going to jump in. And I don't want to be too long, so I really want to get to it. All right, so I want to start. You can go ahead and get your Bibles open to John 18. I want to start by setting a scene for you. Right before Jesus is crucified, this was a long time ago, and so a lot of times when we look at the Bible, we tend to put it in this religious box, and we don't think about like all the history, all the politics. I mean, we just read it for face value, and so I want to give you a little bit background on that. There is so much political stuff happening in this chapter. It's incredible. And so really, when we think about politics nowadays, we think, we separate church and state and all that. Well, they didn't have any of that, right? They had this sort of weird quasi like Jewish Roman sort of rule, and they had to, the Romans were in charge, but they actually had to give the Jews some kind of freedom, or else they would lose the Jews, right? And the Jews would have an insurrection, and it wouldn't be good. So they actually had Jewish rulers also, and so there was the Roman rulers, and there was the Sanhedrin, which actually had two distinct political parties in it, and one of them was the Sadducees, and the other was the Pharisees. You kind of hear both of those words going back and forth. That's what that is. That's the Jewish elite of their day. And so I like to include this also as part of the politics in here. There's a mob of people, and the people actually have some real political power, don't they? Because each of these different other political groups are afraid of the mob of people that might just start picking up stones and stoning people, or, it was kind of this vigilante sort of situation. It's hopefully nothing really like America today. I hope it's not turning into that, but yeah. So it's very precarious. And so if you think about Jesus from the perspective of the Jews and the Jewish rulers, here he is. He's the star prophet. As a little kid, he went into the temple and started blowing people away, right? He has a super compelling message. Not only that, but he heals people. He raises the dead. I mean, this guy is amazing, and all the people love him. I mean, he was walking through town on a donkey, and people are throwing their coats down, and they're waving palm branches. It's like better than blowing up on social media, right? It's just, he has a lot of power with the people, okay? And it's also been prophesied, by the way, he claims to be the Son of God, which is kind of a problem for them, because there was a prophecy that the Messiah, the government, would be on his shoulders. And so that's pretty scary, both for the Jews that are trying to work with the Romans to rule, and also for the Romans that want to keep their rule, right? So this is very tricky here. And earlier in John, it even quotes the Pharisees as saying, look how the whole world has gone after them. There should be a slide on that, I think. So this is their whole world, okay? This isn't just one of those piddly little passion plays that I used to do when I was a kid. This is, he is rocking it, okay? Jesus is. And Caiaphas, he's the high priest, and he actually sees this danger. And it's so interesting what he says here. He's like, in his political mind, he's saying, you know what? This Jesus is getting so dangerous that it would probably be better for him to die than for us all to die as a nation because of this insurrection, because Jesus is just too out of control. And then the Romans will come after us and all this. So he says, wouldn't it be great if one man could pay for everyone? And so he kind of prophesies in this state. I think that's awesome. So we're going to see that in a little bit. But let's go ahead and jump into chapter 18. We're in the garden, and right before he's betrayed by Judas, one of his friends. And I want you to notice how much shifting is going on here in this chapter. And, we like to talk about blame shifting, but I make up a term here, responsibility shifting. Everybody's shifting responsibility. So blame shifting is pretending that something is someone else's fault, but responsibility shifting is pretending that something is someone else's job. And this is a lot more subtle and harder to recognize because it's sort of an inactivity, right? When you shift your responsibility, you're like, oh, someone else will do that. You're not doing anything, right? And so that's kind of what these people do. I want you to notice how many times it happens in this chapter. And so it's almost like they're playing hot potato with Jesus. Like, what do you want to do with him? I don't know. What do you want to do with him? And, they're just, nobody wants to deal with Jesus. So, like I said, Jesus is growing in favor with God, favor with man. And sometimes favor grows to the point where a big bullseye gets painted on your head. Like, sometimes favor isn't actually fun. But Jesus didn't lose his favor as he's going to the cross. It just got bigger. Yep. And so let's go ahead and read verse 1. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who had betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it that you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said. And Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Isn't that interesting? It's like something just pushed them over. Again he asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those you gave me." I think that's really cool. The power in Jesus saying, I am he. And then it's amazing what he commands them to do. He says, "Let these men go," speaking about his disciples. They actually do it. Like, why would they obey a prisoner? It was like he had this Jedi mind power. You will let them go. And I feel like this just demonstrates that Jesus never lost his authority.
Right.
If he would have commanded anything, I think it would have happened at that moment in time. But he willingly went to the cross because he knew it was part of his responsibility. So, verse 10, then Simon Peter, who had the sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. Ouch. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup my Father has given me?" All right, so here's where we're going to focus on Peter a little bit more. Peter's so fun to focus on. He's so encouraging to our walk with God because he messes up so much. But let's do a little flashback. I mean, we don't have to flashback very far. It's that very night that he is told, "You're going to betray me, Peter," by Jesus. He's told by Jesus, "You're going to betray me 3 times. You think you're going to die for me," and he swears he's going to die for Jesus, but instead he betrays him. And he even promises, Matthew 26:33 tells us that Peter even says this, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." So this is a bold statement here. And not only does it show his loyalty to Jesus, but it also implies that everyone around him is quite a bit weaker than him. Just subtly, Doesn't it do that a little bit? And then, so he feels this need, and this is how I know he's a little bit insecure, because he feels this need to decrease others just a little bit in order to increase himself. And so he kind of tells on himself in this moment. And I think Peter knows at this point, yeah, you're not going to make it. and I don't know, if some of us, you mentioned, you admitted some of you're insecure. I think sometimes we tend to want to, in those moments, decrease others to gain significance, to decrease someone else's significance. But the funny thing is that true significance actually comes when we acknowledge the significance of others in our relationships, not in spite of them.
Yeah.
You know, like as a mom at home, and any parent at home with their kids, does not feel very significant most of the time. You're, wiping up bodily fluids, and you're just alone, not rubbing shoulders with any, famous VIPs or anything like that. And so you can feel very, very insignificant in that role. And but what I realize when I think about my kids, and I look at them and their individual gifts, their personality, the uniqueness that God created them with, I think, man, how significant am I to pour into these human beings that are eternal, right? Yep. So I feel like if we're struggling with insignificance, we need to think about how significant are you? Like, it's just in our relationship with one another, let alone our relationship with God, how we can come before the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, like before his throne, any moment of the day. Yeah. That's a lot of significance. But we still struggle with it. Now, last week, Pastor Rich mentioned the victim mindset, which we all know about the victim mindset, and we don't want to carry it around with us. It's not something fun. And then he also mentioned the survivor mindset, how, it's better than the victim mindset, but it's not always the best place to live. But I have a new mindset for Peter today. He, I believe, shifted into this prove something mindset. In that moment, when he said, you're going to betray me, I think, like, the lights went dark, and everything was like, wah, wah, wah. And all of a sudden, Peter's like, okay, how can I prove myself now? Right. Like, I am ready to go. And I don't think he heard anything else Jesus said after that. Because if he did, he probably wouldn't have acted how he acted. So he starts daydreaming and scheming, I believe. This is just conjecture, but about how he's going to prove his worth to Jesus. So they're getting ready to head out for a place of prayer, and guess what he takes with him? His sword. I don't know if you've ever been to the prayer meeting with a sword. Maybe some of you have. But, and of course, because he's trying to prove himself, he's in full-on prove yourself mode, he's going to whip out a sword at the first chance he gets. Now, Jake and I were trying to figure out how it would be to cut off someone's ear and not glop off their shoulder or something like that, but I don't know. That's fair. There's lots of different reasons you might have done that. But clearly, Peter wasn't listening to the whole point of Jesus talking to them before he went to the cross. And so he rebukes him. So now, not only has he been rebuked that night, but now again, in the garden, he's rebuked. Have you ever tried to prove yourself to somebody and it completely backfires? Yeah. Especially, I think of romance, prove your love, and then sorry, not so much, I'll pass on you. And that is a kind of pain that doesn't go away easily. And I can imagine how Peter felt again. He's trying to give his life, he's trying to make a big statement, and here Jesus doesn't appreciate it at all. And so, and then you think back further to his relationship with Jesus, how he was the first to acknowledge that Jesus was the Son of God. Right. And because of that, Jesus gave him a new name and said, you're not Simon anymore, you're going to be Peter, and you're a rock. And on this rock, I will build my church. And the gates of hell will not be able to prevail against that. I think that did something for Peter. Right. It's a reason why he wanted to follow him to the ends of the earth, right? Because he gave him significance. But no doubt right now, he's not feeling like a rock, unless it's a sinking rock. And so, he's probably thinking, why are you dying at the height of your fame? I wanted to come help you establish something new. I was ready to go. And now my Lord is being taken away. What is going on? He doesn't get it. And when things happen that you don't get, it's that moment of shaking where like your whole world is coming unraveled. That's Peter in this moment. Have you ever been in a season of shaking where you questioned everything you ever knew?
Yep.
You question everything. You question, is Jesus true? I mean, he said I'm a rock. Well, I don't feel like a rock. I feel like a blockhead maybe, but not a rock. And, what else could he do? He tried to fight. What else was left to do? He had a lot of energy, and now he's just deflated. So let's look at verse 12. Then the detachment of soldiers with its commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people. That's what I explained to you before. And there's a verse there. If you want to write down, you can look that verse up, and it'll tell you more about that. So they're in Annas' courtyard now. And Annas, there are people that have titles and have power with their titles, but Annas was one that didn't need a title. He had power, right? Because he was the father-in-law of the high priest. And I don't think we get the magnitude of this, of all of these guys going to the court of Annas, but Peter had been raised to revere these guys from the moment he was born, probably. And it would have been almost like the governor mixed with the pope, like you're going in to these guys that are super, super powerful. And all the people around him were rich, and he was just a simple fisherman. And so I want you to keep that in mind as we keep reading. Verse 15, Simon Peter and the other disciple were following Jesus. Well, it's probably John, because John likes to talk about himself in third person for some reason. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus to the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside of the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you? She asked Peter. He replied, I am not. It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they'd made to keep warm. Peter was also standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. I always taught in the synagogues or at the temple, where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. When Jesus said this, one of the high priests, the officials slapped him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself. So they asked him, you aren't one of his disciples too, are you? He denied it, saying, I am not. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. Didn't I see you with him in the garden? Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment, a rooster began to crow. Okay, so with what we know about Peter's emotional state at this moment, how would you feel now that you've been rebuked twice by Jesus and rejected, and then now you have to wait outside the door of these super important people, right? And your buddy gets to go in because he has the connections and you don't. Right now I'd be thinking, why am I even here? Should I be here? Should I run away? What should I do? And finally they get him in. He's allowed in, checked by the bouncers or whatever. And he stands there and he's probably just trying. Have you ever been in a room where you're trying to be invisible? And so yeah, I can just imagine him standing at the periphery trying to blend in with the crowd. And he feels like a complete outsider and a fraud. But he's there anyway. Yeah. But he just doesn't feel like he should be there. And so the thing is, he can't go by without being noticed. Have you ever had that happen to you? Where, he had been with Jesus and it made all the difference. I think the fact that he had been with Jesus actually showed spiritually in his life. And I think they could have recognized him by other factors, but I believe there was something spiritually about him. He was a light. Jesus said, you are the light of the world. You can't be hidden. And so even though he wanted to remain hidden, he couldn't be hidden. He was marked by God, and he was already declared significant to God. Wow. Even though he did not feel like the rock Peter. he was still the rock. That identity didn't change based on how he felt about himself.
That's good.
The destiny may as well have been tattooed on his head, but he wasn't walking in it. And I know I've been into rooms where I felt like I shouldn't be here, or, has somebody given permission for me to be here? Or can I be myself, or do I need to cut off pieces of who I am to fit in? Have you been in this? Okay. And I used to have dreams. Well, I still have dreams all the time about clothing, okay? And I know some of you might have had naked dreams, but a lot of times I'll have dreams where, like, just parts of my clothing is missing, like my pants. And so one time I had this dream where I walked into this church and I didn't have any pants. And nobody really notices in your dreams like they would in real life, thankfully. But you're just kind of a little awkward and you're off just a little bit and you're like trying to look for some pants, like just laying around. It's like the Lego movie. Where are my pants? And so what I felt like God was telling me, though, through the pants thing. Now, my mom's a really good dream interpreter, so I always have her help me out. But she's like, a lot of times that means authority, or like your calling or your gifting or whatever. If you leave your pants, like, you're not acknowledging that. And so you're kind of like leaving behind something you need to walk in authority. So yeah, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. And I would leave my pants at home, I guess spiritually and emotionally. But if we were made to be a light and we were made to put on display, I think that we need to bring our clothes with us and we need to be who we are in every situation. We need to bring who we are, like bring it. And I can't tell you what that is for you. Like right now, I've never preached for you guys, and that is kind of a scary thing, but I'm being who I am in my gifting right now. Like, I'm wearing my pants, right? Thankfully, thank Jesus. So what he does is he kind of just leaves his pants. He's like, that's not me. I'm not that person. But he's on display anyway. And he lies about who he is. Because I think when you lie about who you are, you're really not believing it, who you are.
Sure.
So then the rooster began to crow. And you could think of like, oh, ouch, I got my hand in the cookie jar kind of moment. But I kind of think of it like, what does the rooster do? They crow when it's time to wake up. So I feel like the rooster crowing was actually a wake-up call to him to go, hey, remember? Like, Jesus' words to you were true. Everything he said about you and your identity, even though you just screwed up royally, is still you. You are still that rock, even though you messed it up. And so I'm not going to read the whole rest of the chapter for the sake of time, but basically they're still playing hot potato with Jesus. They take him to the governor Pilate, the Roman governor, and because they can't execute him themselves, they're not allowed to do that. So they pass him off to Pilate, and Pilate actually listens to Jesus. He's the only one who really listens to him. And he actually agrees with Jesus. So Jesus is actually a really good lawyer for himself. But the problem is the truth doesn't really matter at this point. And all Pilate is worried about is another Jewish insurrection. He cannot have that on his hands. So he continues to pass Jesus off and say, okay, I guess you guys want to execute him? Go ahead. And so he gives them permission to be killed. So we have all these people interacting with Jesus, and no one wants to take responsibility for Jesus. Not his enemies, not his friends, not the Jews, and not the Romans. So I want to define responsibility. This is super, super easy. Responsibility is a response to your ability. Doesn't take a genius. But responsibility is like this word that's not very fun to talk about. Like, who wants to have a message on responsibility? Not Jake, right? You have too much of it already. But responsibility is really an amazing thing. And I believe that responsibility gives us a feeling of meaning and significance to our lives like little else can. I believe that Jesus' life was meaningful in large part because he responded to the ability that God put in him. That he took the responsibility for the entire world when no one was willing to take responsibility for him. And why was he able to do that? I mean, we could say, yeah, he's God, but he was in constant relationship with his Father. Yeah. His Father held the world in his hands, and I think they took that responsibility together. As a man walking on earth, he couldn't do it alone, and neither can we. Now, I want to address this thing of those of you who are thinking, I have too much responsibility. Why are you talking to me about responsibility? I'm probably less responsible than you are, right? But you may be picking up the wrong responsibilities. When Peter went into the garden with his sword, Jesus never asked him to take a sword. He never asked him to go defend him to the death. He just said, be who you are, and let me do this. Let me die. And so I think sometimes we want to be these world crusaders, and we want to fix everyone and save everyone from everything, especially our families and the people that we love. So we vacillate. We're on this side over here doing things that we think, will help us fix everything, and God never asked us to. Then we go on this side, and we're like, oh, that didn't work. So now that we wring our hands and we become helpless, hopeless, like, I can't do anything because I tried that and it didn't work, right? So we end up vacillating. But as Christ followers, we really don't have the option of saying, I can't. We can say I won't, but we can't really say I can't because I can do all things because we have Christ to strengthen us. Right. So you are only responsible to do what God gave you to do. This sounds so incredibly simple.
It's good, Lee.
The good works he prepared in advance for you to do. Nobody else can tell you that, but you know it between you and God. Peter wanted to give his life for Jesus, but Jesus only asked him to give his name. That's it. So, it's hard because we don't get to choose when the spotlight comes on us in our lives. Peter was out there and he wanted the spotlight to be on this moment where he's warring and fighting for Jesus. But God puts the spotlight on him when he least wants to be seen. Right. And he's like, whoo, I'm going to see what you do here. I'm going to give you 3 chances to say who you are, to remind you of who you are. But because it wasn't a big gesture, he ignored it. Now, I was at Walmart a few weeks ago, and I was getting stuff for Jake, my husband here, his birthday. We had a surprise birthday for him. And I went a different way than I normally went. And I saw a lady outside, holding a sign, asking for money. And she was hooked up to a machine to help her breathe. And I just had this passing thought, I could probably pray for her. And my heart kind of went out to her. And the minute that registered in my head, I was like, oh, crap. And we can say that here, right? Oh, crap. I don't think crap is a cuss word anymore, really. I don't know. Anyway, so I thought that, and this is not something I do every day. So I just went in the store, and I went and got all my stuff. And I was like, well, let's see how long it takes. And I get into the car and look at the time, just looking for excuses, right? And I'm like, okay, my mother-in-law's home with the kids. It's pretty much all the way done. We're 3 hours till his thing. I'm like, I don't have any excuses right now. So then I go by that same way and roll down the window, thinking maybe she could, if she doesn't want prayer, I won't give her prayer. So I just roll it down like, would you like somebody to pray for you? She's like, oh, yes. And so, I followed through with it, right? But it's like these moments of responsibility come walking by. Like there are oh crap moments, right? Where hopefully they won't stay that way, but they're just like these moments where we know that we have the ability to respond to that need. And it's those specific moments that give it power. Like we could look at the whole entire world and say, oh, there's so many people that need help, and become overwhelmed, try to fight all the wars that we can fight. But no, when it becomes specific, then it becomes doable, and then it becomes responsibility time. And there was a church not far from where she was standing. They could have done it, right? She could have walked over there if she really needed prayer. But God was speaking to my heart, and he doesn't do that all the time, but he was speaking to my heart about her in particular. And I just decided, you know what? Even though it's uncomfortable and I don't do it every day, I'm going to be who I am, and I am a child of God, and I know how to pray. Even if some big miracle, I don't know what happened to her. It was just a simple interaction, but it didn't really matter because I was responding to my ability in Jesus Christ. And the thing about this is we're not trying to prove anything. I think for so long in the church we've been, clanging our swords, trying to prove, like, how many have you saved and all this stuff, It's not about proving anything to anybody. We're just acting on who we are. And there is a big difference when it comes from that place. So we don't have the ability to make everything in the world right. This is a revelation because Jesus didn't make everything right when he walked on the earth either. Wow. Like, he didn't stop slavery, How could, but he did what his Father said to do. But we can make something right. And it's in the abilities that you have. Stand in them, don't apologize for them. Even when you're surrounded by people that intimidate you and you wonder what they think of you, that's not an excuse, really. So if you struggle with insignificance, here's another revelation I felt like God gave me in reading this. I feel like a feeling of significance is a symptom for actually not taking the right responsibilities. And this is an interesting connection here, but see, I think that when those opportunities come walking by and we don't take them, I think it trains our brain to go, maybe I'm not able to respond. Like, you can teach your brain different things, and when you actually respond, you're teaching yourself that you are able. But when you don't respond, you're teaching yourself that you are helpless. And I think that just speaks to your spirit. I am powerless. I am insignificant. I can't do anything. So I think it atrophies us, and it feeds this vicious cycle of powerlessness. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. And I just want you to close your eyes and ask the Lord where those places of insignificance are for you. The lie that you've been subtly listening to, that you don't make a difference, that you're too small, you're not gifted enough, that you aren't able, that you maybe have been disqualified. Maybe there's a little bit of a prove something mindset in you where you're just trying all these things to prove yourself to yourself and to God and to other people that you matter. But Lord, today we just want to repent from all these wrong mindsets, from vacillating between I'm not enough and I can do everything without you. And we just lay down everything right now. We lay down our responsibilities, and then we ask you, Lord, as we look at those responsibilities, which ones do you really want us to pick up and take a hold of? Which ones have you empowered us to do? And we willingly pick up the load that you have made us able to bear. We say yes to those things, free from guilt. And we thank you, Lord, that you are our strength, that we don't have to walk out of the house without you, that you have given us a new name and authority. We don't have to leave our pants at home, God. You have clothed us in righteousness, and we are more than conquerors. And God, I pray over this church that we would see one another as God sees us. When you see a friend that's like, I can't, and then you go and say, no, that's not who I know. I know you as this and this and this. I see what's in you. God, let us be that place where we can get built up in love so that we can go out and be more than conquerors. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Lee. All right, well, we are going to dismiss here.